He was supposed to die with honor, not like this. Not in front of a crowd that didn't know him, not with his daughters watching, not as a traitor. Ned Stark spent his entire life believing in something simple, that if a man does the right thing, if he tells the truth, if he lives with honor, then the world, eventually, responds in kind. That justice matters, that rules matter, that honor protects you. But when the moment finally came, when his fate was decided, and the sword was raised, none of those beliefs saved him. No honor, no justice, no fairness, just power, and the will of someone stronger. And that's what makes his story so unsettling. Because Ned Stark didn't lose everything in a single moment of weakness. He lost because he never changed. Because the very thing that made him strong was the same thing that made him predictable. And in a world where power doesn't follow rules, predictability is a death sentence. What's even more disturbing is this. The warning was always there, not hidden, not subtle. It was right at the beginning. A man runs through the snow, breath shaking, legs barely holding, turning back again and again, as if something unseen is still following him. There's no direction, no plan, just fear. The kind that doesn't come from imagination, but from something real. Something he wasn't meant to see. Then he's caught, dragged back to a place that feels colder than the forest itself. Not because of the wind, but because of what's about to happen. He's forced to kneel, surrounded by men who aren't shouting, aren't angry, aren't even cool. They're calm, which somehow makes it worse. At the center of it, all Ned Stark, still, composed, watching. Not like a man deciding, but like a man who already has. The deserter tries to speak. His voice cracks, words stumbling over each other, trying to explain what he saw beyond the wall. Something inhuman, something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. But the more he speaks, the less it matters, because the truth isn't what's being judged here. The judgment was made the moment he ran. Bran stands nearby, quiet, watching everything. Too young to understand what this means, but old enough to remember how it feels. Ned turns to him, not to comfort him, not to shield him, but to teach him. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. It isn't said with pride or anger, just certainty. Then he steps forward. No hesitation, no pause to reconsider. He takes the sword himself, not handing it off, not looking away. Because to him, this isn't about punishment. It's about responsibility. The blade rises, heavy, deliberate, controlled. Time slows, the world holds its breath. But Ned doesn't. And then, he brings it down. One clean strike, the body falls. The sound echoes for a moment, then disappears into the silence. No celebration, no reaction, just cold air. A lifeless body, and a boy trying to understand what justice looks like. And in that silence, something else settles in. Not just death, but a belief, a way of seeing the world that feels unshakable. That moment isn't just about justice. It's about how Ned Stark understands the world. For him, honor is not a choice. It's not something he turns on when it's convenient, and off when it becomes dangerous. It's who he is. Every decision he makes, every judgment he passes, comes from a belief that right and wrong are clearly defined, and that a man's duty is to stand on the right side of that line, no matter the cost. That's why he doesn't look away when the sword falls. Because to him, power isn't about control, it's about accountability. Most men in positions like his would distance themselves from that moment. They would let someone else carry it out, create space between the decision and the consequence. But Ned refuses that distance, because he believes that if you're willing to take a life, you should be willing to feel the weight of it. It's a harsh philosophy, but it's also deeply human. There's no cruelty in him, no enjoyment, no desire to dominate, only a quiet understanding that order requires sacrifice, and that someone has to bear that responsibility. And that's what makes him different. Not stronger, not smarter, just consistent. He doesn't bend his values depending on the situation. He doesn't reshape the truth to protect himself. He doesn't play with rules or reinterpret them when they become inconvenient. To Ned Stark, honor is the foundation that holds everything together. Without it, power becomes chaos. Without it, leadership becomes manipulation. Without it, justice becomes meaningless. So he holds on to it, tightly, even when it isolates him, even when it makes things harder, even when it demands something personal. Because he believes that if he lets go of that principle, even once, then everything else begins to fall apart. And in a place like the North, that belief makes him a good leader, a respected one, a man people can trust. But it also creates something else, something far more dangerous. It makes him predictable, because when a man follows a code that rigidly, his actions stop being choices. They become patterns, and patterns can be read, anticipated, used, which means that the same honor that makes Ned Stark reliable also makes him vulnerable. Not in a world where everyone plays by the same rules, but in a world where no one does, and that's where the flaw begins to reveal itself. Not in what Ned Stark believes, but in what he refuses to question. Because in that moment, something doesn't fit. The man kneeling in the snow isn't lying. He isn't defiant. He isn't trying to escape punishment. He's terrified, not of death, but of what he saw. He tries to explain it. Something beyond the wall. Something unnatural. Something that shouldn't exist. And for a brief second, the truth is there, right in front of Ned. But it passes, ignored, dismissed. Not because Ned is careless, but because he already knows what matters. The law is clear. Desertion is death. No exceptions. No interpretation. And that's the problem. Because Ned isn't judging the man. He's judging the act. The context doesn't matter. The fear doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. Only the rule. And in that decision, you see the first crack, not in his morality, but in his awareness. Because the world he believes in is structured, predictable, built on clear lines between right and wrong. But the world he actually lives in is not. It's messy, uncertain, full of things that don't fit into rules. And instead of adjusting to that complexity, Ned rejects it. He chooses certainty over curiosity, structure over truth. Because questioning the rule would mean questioning the system. And questioning the system would mean questioning everything he stands on. So he doesn't. He follows the code, even when the code is incomplete, even when it fails to capture reality. And that's what turns his strength into something fragile. Because a man who never questions his beliefs can't see when they stop working. He becomes rigid, predictable, blind to anything that doesn't align with what he already knows. And in a controlled environment, that kind of certainty looks like strength. But in an unpredictable world, it becomes a weakness. Not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, quietly, until one day, that same certainty leads him into a situation where the rules don't apply. And he doesn't realize it until it's too late. What makes that moment so powerful isn't just what it reveals about Ned Stark. It's what it quietly predicts. Because the structure of that execution doesn't end in the snow. It repeats. A man is called a traitor, brought before authority, given no real chance to be understood, judged not for the full truth, but for the part that fits the rule. And then, he's executed. At first, it feels like justice. Clean, certain, controlled. But later, the same pattern returns. Only this time, Ned Stark is the one kneeling. He's the one being called a traitor. Not because he betrayed anyone, but because the system decided he did, just like the deserter. His truth doesn't matter. His intentions don't matter. The reality of what actually happened is irrelevant. What matters is what power declares. And just like before, the judgment is already made. But this time, something is different. When Ned passed the sentence, he carried it out himself. He believed that responsibility and action should never be separated. That if you decide a man must die, you should be the one to face it. But when his turn comes, that principle disappears. The man who condemns him doesn't swing the sword. A king gives the order, but someone else carries it out. The distance Ned refused to create becomes the very system that destroys him. And in that moment, the contrast is complete. In the north, justice was personal, direct, owned. In King's Landing, justice is distant. He walks into a world where power hides behind layers, and expects it to behave like a world where power stands exposed. That's the tragedy, because everything he does later, every decision, every choice, follows the exact same pattern you saw in the beginning. He warns his enemies, because it feels right. He tells the truth, because it feels necessary. He trusts that honor will create space for fairness, because it always has. But in doing that, he reveals himself, again and again, just like a pattern. And powerful people don't ignore patterns. They study them, wait for them, exploit them. By the time Ned realizes what kind of world he's in, it's already too late. Because he isn't losing due to one mistake. He's losing because he's consistent. The same man who stood in the snow, calm, certain, unwavering, is the same man who stands before the crowd later, stripped of control, surrounded by power he doesn't understand. Nothing about him changed, and that's exactly why his fate never could. The execution in the beginning wasn't just a lesson for Bran. It was a mirror, a quiet, almost invisible reflection of what was coming, not as a warning, but as a certainty. Because in a world where rules bend, and power decides what truth looks like, a man who refuses to bend at all doesn't just struggle to survive, he guarantees that he won't. And when you step back from that pattern, it stops being just about Ned Stark. It becomes a reflection of the world he lives in. Because the real conflict in this story isn't between good and evil. It's between two completely different ways of understanding power. In the North, power is tied to responsibility. It's visible, grounded in trust. A leader is expected to stand in front of his decisions, not hide behind them, to be accountable, not protected. That's why Ned's philosophy works there, because the system around him supports it. People believe in the same structure. They respect the same rules. Honor, in that environment, isn't just a personal value. It's a shared agreement. But beyond the North, that agreement disappears. In places like King's Landing, power doesn't come with responsibility. It comes with distance. Decisions are made behind closed doors. Consequences are carried out by others. Truth is adjusted, depending on who needs it. And the people in control don't follow rules. They define them. That's the world Ned walks into. A place where honesty is seen as exposure. Where consistency is seen as weakness. Where doing the right thing doesn't protect you. It reveals you. Because in a system like that, power doesn't reward integrity. It uses it. Ned believes that if he stays true to his values, the system will recognize it. That fairness will emerge. That truth will eventually win. But the system he's in is not designed for fairness. It's designed for survival, for control, for revenge. And in that kind of environment, the rules aren't broken. They're rewritten constantly. Which means someone like Ned isn't just out of place. he's at a disadvantage from the start because he's playing a game with fixed principles. In a world where the rules change depending on who holds power, and that mismatch is what defines everything that follows. Not just for him, but for the entire story. Because over time, you begin to see the same pattern repeat with others. Characters who adapt, survive. Characters who manipulate, rise. Characters who understand the system, learn how to move within it. And those who don't, those who hold on to a rigid sense of right and wrong, face the consequences. Not because they're wrong, but because the world they're in doesn't operate on that logic. That's what makes this story feel so unsettling. There's no guarantee that being good will save you. No assurance that truth will be enough. No system that rewards fairness just because it should. Only a constant tension between what is right and what actually works. And Ned Stark stands at the center of that tension. A man built for a world that values honor, forced into one that doesn't, trying to apply rules that no one else is following, and paying the price for it. And when you look at it all together, it becomes clear that Ned Stark's story was never about a sudden fall. It was about inevitability. From the very beginning, he was walking a path that could only end one way. Not because he made one wrong move, but because he never allowed himself to move differently. He believed that honor would guide him, that doing the right thing would be enough, that if he stayed true to his values, the world would eventually meet him there. But the world never moved. And that's what makes his story so tragic. Not that he failed, but that he never saw the need to change. Because in a different world, his philosophy would have made him the perfect ruler. A man people could trust. A man who wouldn't abuse power. A man who would carry the weight of every decision he made. But in this world, those same qualities became limitations. He didn't lose because he lacked strength. He lost because his strength had no protection. And that's the quiet truth behind everything you saw. Honor, on its own, is not enough. Not in a world where power decides what truth looks like. Not in a world where rules are shaped by those who benefit from them. And yet, that doesn't make Ned Stark wrong. If anything, it makes him rare. Because while others learned to bend, manipulate, and survive, he remained exactly who he was. Uncompromising, consistent, unchanged. And maybe that's why his story stays with people. Not because he won, but because he refused to become something else just to survive. In a Game of Thrones, his thoughts often return to duty, to family, to the weight of doing what is right, even when it costs him everything. And in the end, that's exactly what it does. He loses his position, his freedom, his life, but he never loses himself. And maybe that's the final contradiction, that the very thing that doomed him is also the reason he's remembered. If you see stories like this differently, if you enjoy breaking down the psychology behind characters and the worlds they exist in, then stay with this space. There's always more beneath the surface, waiting to be understood.